I can say without a doubt that the most advanced yoga I have ever done is raising children. And I used to wrap my legs behind my head every morning before coffee. My name is Sarah Ezrin. I'm a writer, yoga teacher, content creator, and the mom to 2 young boys. I recently wrote the book, The Yoga of Parenting, 10 yoga-based practices to help you stay grounded, connect with your kids, and be kind to yourself. One of the highlights of this journey has been sitting down with parents from all around the world to hear how yoga has informed their parenting. Their stories are fascinating, funny, raw, and sometimes heartbreaking. I spoke with step-parents, single parents, grandparents, and though everyone's identities and family structures are completely different, all of these parents have the same intention: to parent from a place of connection. I am honored to share these stories with all of you in this limited series podcast, The Yoga of Parenting. Welcome, everybody. This is Sarah Ezrin, and I'm here with Darren Main for this episode of The Yoga of Parenting. And Darren is an exception because he's one of the few people from the book that I have asked to come back for a second conversation, and that is because Darren is exceptional. He is a 4-time author. Is it four books? I was like
It might
Googling all
be
the books.
5. I'd
Oh
have
my
to
gosh.
count.
Okay, so 4-time author, podcast host. His current podcast, he's had a couple different projects, but right now it's Living Yoga, a yoga and meditation teacher, a mindful business coach. You have a number of these specialty workshops and offerings. I love your Authentically Gay program where you are empowering gay men through self-care practices. And then, of course, you also do body work, which is like, when do you have time for anything? But I just really appreciate you, speaking of taking the time to be here with me. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. And it's such an honor to be in your book. I can't believe you want me back for more. I
Well,
would
what
have
I
thought you'd stop
realized,
taking my calls by now.
no, please. I want as much as I can get, because what I realized was that when we had our conversation and it was like a good hour, we talked a lot about your son. And I don't know if you're comfortable with me saying his name on here, but we talked
Go
a
for
lot
it.
about with Jaden and the origin story, which is the coolest story ever, by the way. And it's amazing. And I write about that in the supplementary ebook that comes with the book. And then the book itself, things get edited down, but I kept it somewhere so we all have access. And I realized that we didn't really talk about you and how you're balancing all of these things. And especially as a single dad, I know that things were in the beginning, you did mention like how your physical asana practice shifted, and now having a 12, maybe 13-year-old now. Is he 13, 14? How old is he now?
13.
13, my goodness. So I wanted to talk to you about that evolution, about being, can I say, an A-type overachiever? Am I allowed to say that?
You
Because
can, it's not the worst thing anyone's ever called me.
takes one to know one. When you're like me, we have all, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's not just working hard, it's all these passion projects. Some are quite disparate. They're all connected through this idea of yoga and mindfulness, but doing the body work is obviously different than sitting down at your computer. And so your energy is spread out all over the place. And then to be a single dad. So what I wanted to talk to you about was balancing all of those different things. And I'll get to a specific question, I promise, but just for the arc of the conversation, and how you're taking care of you while you are the main provider. I don't want to say sole, because I know you have a lot of friends and family that are helping, but as being the main provider for another person. So how do you do that? And if you want to have a general comment, then I have my specific question.
Well, the truth is, I'm not sure some days I do it really well, and many days I fall far short of my ideals. And as a yogi, a lot of it is for me about compassion, self-compassion, and recognizing that we don't, just like we don't do tree pose perfectly every time, we fall at a tree. And that's part of the benefit of tree pose, is not balancing perfectly, but falling and coming back, falling and coming back. And I feel like parenting is very much like that. It's like we have these ideals of we're going to do everything just right and be these perfect parents, and they're only going to eat kale chips for snacks and never a Dorito. And but the truth is, parenting is hard, and something's got to give somewhere. And for me, being a yogi parent is about having forgiveness, compassion, doing my best, having certain things that are absolutely essential, but recognizing he's going to watch videos and that's okay. During the pandemic, he's going to play video games. It's the only way he can connect with his friends. And that wasn't my ideal in the beginning. And it's there now. But practicing that idea of like just constantly trying to do a better job, but without the judgment that so many of us as parents fall into.
So that's, and that's an example of the limits that you've been looser on for him and his behavior. But I assume, and I'd love to hear about you being kinder to yourself and giving yourself grace, and maybe an example too of a moment where, you had to kind of loosen up, where it was the equivalent of a kale chip, but perhaps on, one of your dharmic paths of offerings, and how
Yeah.
you had to kind of back up and be like, okay, this less is more in this instant. Do you have an example that comes to mind?
Um, just today, probably.
Like this morning?
No, I think some of it is there's a saying, don't worry what you say to your kids, worry what they see you're doing. I mean, there's a better way of phrasing it, but it's something to that effect. And I feel like when we can be messy, but committed to cleaning up the messes we make, um, that gives our kids permission to do the same thing. Right? This whole idea that you have to be the perfect parent and never get
Mm,
upset. So for me, it's like if I sort of lose my cool a little bit and raise my voice, or I remember many, many years ago, I gave a talk at Sony and they gave my son a free PlayStation. And he thought it was amazing. And so he got Fortnite. And I put my credit card in so we could get a few of these V-Bucks or whatever. And then I got a bill from my credit card for like $600. And I had this moment of like just absolutely blowing my stack. It was not my most dignified parenting moment. Um, and there was that moment at which I was like, you know what? It's okay to lose your shit once in a while, as long as you clean up the mess. And to
mm,
be able to go to him and say, buddy, we need to talk about what you did and why that's not okay. But he didn't realize that clicking that button was going to be a bad thing. And I had to say, you know what? I could have responded to that better. We could have
mm,
talked about it, used, you know, kinder words and all of that. Eh, But the truth is, we all have those moments where we sort of lose it, and it's okay. What we need to demonstrate is not just the losing our shit part, but the humility that comes with saying, I'm sorry, and let's make it right. And what can we learn from this?
mm,
So, for me, again, it's about that compassion and loving kindness toward myself, but also recognizing that that's teaching him to be the same way with himself. And when he inevitably gets frustrated with whoever is in his life in the future, a partner, a coworker, and he says something out of anger or frustration, that he has the self-awareness to go back and sort of clean that up and say, let's make this right.
I love that. So when he was first born and he first came into your life, and he came into your life was it how many weeks or how many days?
He was 16 months old,
He was
but
16. Oh, right. So he was
yeah.
over a year. I forgot. Yes, yes, yes. I did know that. So he was 16 months old, but still a baby, and I have my 12-month-old and, like even my 3.5-year-old, there is a, a different level of need than, when a teenager is in your life, or even, preschool or young childhood. You were traveling the world, you were doing quite a bit as far as career. You had told me in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you had, quite a strong asana practice. You were teaching all around San Francisco. Were you able, in that shift into becoming a father in those early days, was it like a slamming on the brakes? Were you trying to manage all these things at the same time and then plates began to fall? How, and it balanced being on that
Yeah.
continuum, how did you start to tip yourself towards a place that was more centered and, finding something that was more sustainable for
Yeah.
you in those early, really demanding days?
Well, for me, and my story is different than most. I adopted my son, and so unlike pregnancy, where it's like it's 9 months, give or take a few days. You know about the
It's 10.
time frame they're going to show up, hopefully, and you can start to sort of mentally prepare and structure your life and cancel business trips and plan for maternity/paternity leave. Um, they handed me my son like the day my home study was done. I thought I was going to have like a year, 2 years of searching, and they just called me up and like, we got one. And I'm like, what? I thought they were messing with me. So I had all of these trips booked for,
Mm.
retreats and guest teaching at different studios around the country. Um, it was extensive. And I was just like, what's the big deal? I'll just bring him with me. And I did. And I hired babysitters in the places I went. But it was just so exhausting. And what I realized is that I can't do all of this. I just can't. Something has to go. So I let go of some of my yoga classes and focused on the ones that would help me support myself and my son. I decided I need to earn a living doing something other than traveling constantly, and or choose the traveling that was really meaningful. Like I continued to go to India almost up until a pandemic.
Wow.
My son's been with me to India like 5 or 6 times now over the years. And it became more choosing the things that both satisfied me professionally, but also sustained me financially, and also allowed me to step back and say, I have a primary job now, and it's not teaching yoga. Much as I love teaching yoga, my primary job is being a good dad. And something's got to give. I'd rather make less money and do less, and eventually come back to teaching more, which is sort of where I'm at now that he's older. But it wasn't pretty because I didn't plan for it the way somebody who, a person who's pregnant or a couple that's pregnant has, like, oh, we got 8 more months to figure this out. I didn't even have a crib.
I know, it's like the image, didn't you say, like, on your way home from the hospital, you had to go and buy diapers with
Yeah, I think I talked about
like,
that in the book, but I
yeah.
remember the social workers. She's like, they gave me a few diapers, and she's looking at them, trying to figure out what size they are. And I'm like, diapers come in sizes? And she looked at me. She said, "Oh, honey, like
Like, let's
I
go to
was gonna
rating.
read What to Expect When You're Expecting after the home study was done."
Oh my goodness. But I feel like, that you are a quick study. And I think, from what I've seen of all the different projects and just, even how you pivoted when everything went into shutdown mode, during the pandemic and, what you've rebuilt and built as our studio homes have, crumbled and been rebuilt. I feel like you're a fast adapter. I don't know if, you would agree or disagree, but, I think I assume it was probably like one of the more exciting challenges and projects that you've ever had, and that you dove headfirst into it, like you do with everything else. Is that
Yeah, well, I
fair to
think
say?
yoga, there's that saying, no one gets into the same river twice. Like
Mm,
the river is constantly changing, and no one shows up on their yoga mat with the same body. The body you have today is different than the one yesterday, but we tend not to notice it unless you're like getting over a sickness or dealing with a new injury, or, or you become pregnant, or something happens that changes your body significantly and quickly. And yoga teaches us to pay attention to those changes and adapt to those changes, slowly over time, and sometimes quickly, sometimes expectedly, sometimes unexpectedly. And parenting is like this constant stream of change. It's like as soon as you figure out how to change that diaper, and you can do it in your sleep, and
yeah.
half the time you do, all of a sudden they're potty trained, and you're dealing with like helping them get to school, kindergarten, or now it's like bringing him to his first dance in middle school. And so it's this constant, as soon as you figure it out, it changes again. And I think yoga, that is yoga. It is meeting the moment, whatever shows up in this moment. And when you have a kid, it's like, guess what? Don't get too comfortable.
It's like Yeah, literally when you pick like Jacob was a different person this morning, my baby, like, when you put them down for like a nap and you pick them up 2 hours later and you're like, wait a minute, like who is this person? It's that constant change.
Yeah, and I think like many yogis try to arrange everything just so the right music, the right lighting, the right temperature in the room, everything just right for this Zen moment. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is, yoga's training us to respond to when things don't go well. Right. Anyone can be Zen and at peace when everything is just perfect. But when life happens to you, that's and I think that parenting is like that. It's like they don't have tantrums when you're not late to work, right?
I mean, yeah, it depends what
Right. They
breakfast.
they they time all of this stuff. Like my
Right.
son will get sick and stay home from school at the worst possible time.
Yeah.
And so it's that constant adaptability that yoga teaches us, and then this is like powerlifting.
Mm.
Yoga is
Yeah.
sort of like the Nautilus machines, and parenting is like the powerlifting for the soul.
That's hilarious. I don't even know what it isn't Nautilus. Like, what is that? Is that like NordicTrack? Is
And I
that
think Nautilus was a big brand in the '80s, which I'm.
I feel like it was like an infomercial, right? Like late at night for the Nautilus machine. Was that like this thing? And
I think
then,
I think that it was like a brand, and I think their whole thing was get a Nautilus, get a naughty body,
oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's what I
and
will be.
they
I'll be
probably have
Googling
like
old ads.
big hair and headbands and leg warmers, and it was a good time.
It was very good times. I'm so glad some of that fashion is coming back, but we digress. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's funny because I used to when I very first started teaching, everything had to be exactly that. I mean, my addiction is control, and it comes out in all these different ways, whether it was my eating disorder past or my drug abuse history or my workaholism, or now watching it kind of infuse into my parenting. And I definitely saw it as a yoga teacher in those early days of everything having to be just that, down to controlling my students too. And
yeah,
what I realized for me was that as the years went on and I started to get looser because I was watching them evolve and watching them change and realizing like, oh, it's not my job to be the mold for you. I'm simply the container. It really helped me kind of loosen my control a little bit. And I think that was a really important lesson for me before going into parenting. And I'm wondering because Jaden is now 13. So, you were at a, significant, that's like when I started teaching was 15 years ago. So you had been teaching for some time when he came into your life. Did your teaching inform your parenting or did you watch your teaching evolve as has been getting older? Have those things kind of just been synchronistic? How's that been?
it's both. I mean, like I feel like I always joke like at that point it was over 20 years of practicing and teaching yoga, and gone instantly. Like I was like so zen, and everybody's like, "You're so mellow." Like it's all the yoga, namaste. And then they hand me a baby that's screaming and staying up all night, and you're like, "I'm gonna kill someone." I can't imagine doing it without all those years of training. But it's also, I think the best lessons in yoga are the humbling experiences. When you fart in the middle of class and everybody hears you and laughs, that is like the perfect yoga moment. And having a kid is like that, right? It's constant humility. When your kid is the one biting everybody in preschool, or running off, like, or throwing a tantrum in the middle of the supermarket, and you think you're the only one, and you're mortified and embarrassed, and right, like it's this constant exercise in saying, check yourself, that ego you have, that those control issues. If you're OCD or have control issues, good luck with parenting, because they have no respect for that, and that's a good thing. All right, there's in the Matrix, the Oracle is talking about the architect, and she's like, he's just trying to balance a spreadsheet. That's what he does. He just balances the equation. And Neo says, "What do you do?" And she says, "I unbalance it." And
Mm,
I feel like as parents, we're always trying to get things in order, and kids, their job, it's not a bug, it's a feature, is to knock everything over, to
mm.
throw you off balance, to challenge you, and that's where the growth happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that a lot of like what we I don't know which lineages of yoga you were trained under, but mine was mostly under the Patanjali lens, as opposed to tantric philosophy. Was so much of that was austerity, and we thought it was, don't have a family, focus solely on your practice. But really, when you there are these other lineages, and especially in the tantric lineage, where parenting is the ultimate path because of those reasons. It is one of the householder stage is it's almost essential, because yes, you can go from studentship to sannyasa, you can go from a student directly into the wise, man in the or woman, excuse me, or anybody, any person out in the garden. But but most people or whatever would go through that transition of student into householder, which then feeds you into those more wisdom phases. And it's like we need those experiences to get to the other side of that final release and liberation.
Yeah. There's a story about three yogis sitting in a cave, and there's a noise out, they're trying to meditate, and on the first day there's a noise outside the cave, and the first one says, "What? I think that was a squirrel," and then the next day the second one says, "I think it was a mouse," and the third day, the third yogi says, "Would you two stop arguing? I'm trying to meditate." And it's that idea that you can't escape the body you live in, the world you live in. I mean, it's Buddhism 101, that life is suffering, and it's struggle, it's difficult. And the sooner you embrace that, we can pretend away. I mean, the passive aggressive namaste is like sort of the mantra of modern yogis. Like, it's all good, namaste. And we have this soft spoken tone and everything, but then things get difficult and we lose our shit. The goal of yoga is, I think, more that tantric approach of everything is, your yoga mat is not the thing you do yoga on, it is life, it is wherever you put your feet. um, and when you're parenting or any number of other lived experiences, they're painful and hard and difficult, and they kick your ass and they humble you, and that's your yoga, you know?
Yeah, and I want to get back to the teaching question, because I'm just curious too about, how you're teaching and your parenting kind of, and maybe that was the answer, is how they were all kind of feeding into each other. But really quickly, something that came to mind too is that we work so hard to, and we not being you and I, but there is this toxic positivity movement, and this whole, especially in the wellness world, especially in the yoga world, of like, brushing the suffering under the rug, that we should always be choosing joy. And what happens is that we actually end up dulling all of the negative experiences, and dulling all the challenging experiences. I made air quotes for those of you listening, because there's no such thing, right? All the more challenging experiences, we are actually dulling the joyous moments as well. And that really, it is about, it's that back to that balance and that toggle. It's about, can we be aware and present in all of those moments? And
Yeah. I think for me, to answer your question and to tie into what you were just saying, my teaching used to be about giving people, it wasn't that it was inauthentic. I don't want to say that, but it was all about the joy, the feel good, the hug. um, and now my teaching has shifted more to direct people into their suffering with compassion and loving kindness. Like, look here, right? If you're, a part of your body hurts, if you cut your finger, you don't look the other way and pretend you're not bleeding. Right? You look at it, and you, like the mother that kisses the boo-boo better, you pour loving kindness and compassion into it so healing can occur. But you don't do that by pretending it's not there. And I think as yoga teachers, we're in many ways, like, what I've tried to do as a parent is hold space, not take away my son's struggles, but hold space as he gets those boo-boos, and somebody teases him at school or whatever it is, he's struggling with something at school, or um, to hold space and compassion, to hear him, to pour loving kindness and compassion, but keep him present to it, because that's where he grows and learns. And that is exactly what we do as teachers. A good teacher doesn't blow sunshine up your ass, right? They hold space. They say, it's okay that you're sort of a mess right now, that you're crying. The tears will eventually stop, and then there'll be laughter, and then there'll be more tears, and it's cyclical. Just make peace with it. And I'll be here to sort of hold your hand and kiss your boo-boos. That's all I can do. I can't take your pain away. And, pretending it away isn't helping you. It's keeping you stuck.
And it makes me think, and obviously this is a different podcast, and maybe this is a podcast you do later, but I do think there sometimes are teachers where it's going the other way, where it really is sitting in the suffering. And, maybe that is a part of the ego of, I can heal you, but where people are, it's almost like, that becomes the badge, that becomes the
Yeah.
only lens through which we see things. And really trying to find that balance. I mean, you've witnessed the yoga world and all these different iterations alongside your evolution as a father too, and this
Yeah.
evolution. I mean, even just in the last 3.5 years, since the beginning of the pandemic, and how everything has changed. So I'm just curious now, where are you seeing the bigger arc of yoga going for you, as far as what your teachings are offering, and how is that, what is your parenting? Again, I'm always so curious, like which leads to the next, right? Is it the chicken and the egg? But are these two things happening simultaneously? Is it all like, are you just now into this new phase? Because you seem to be having a lot going on right now, more so than you did a few years ago. But yeah, I'm curious how it's
Yeah.
all synchronizing.
Well, a lot of it was like the pandemic, and then having a smaller child. And now he's 13, and I don't need childcare, and I have more space in my head and in my life. And not that it's not challenging; it's just a different kind of challenge. But I think where I see yoga going, and I want to be very careful here, because I think that some of the stuff we're doing in the yoga world is really good and important. And I'm thinking stuff like trauma informed yoga. I think it's super, super important. But we also have to be super careful that we don't label somebody, and then that becomes just part of their ego narrative. The whole point of doing something like trauma informed yoga is that they can heal that trauma, not get stuck in it. And I see a little of that happening. And working with my son, without going into too much detail, because that's sort of his story, he had a very traumatic start to life, extremely traumatic, both in utero and then in the foster system. And he doesn't have a memory of that per se, but it has affected him. And I've had to find that balance of honoring that this is part of his lived experience. It will be part of him. It shaped him for better or worse into who he is. It happened. We can't pretend it away. It is there. But also recognizing that that never has to limit him, that he can heal it, so that trauma, that pain, becomes a catalyst for something greater down the road. And each of our yoga students is like that. Each of us as yogis is like that. We can get stuck in the trauma and say, this is why I'll always be a mess, because I had these horrible things happen to me. Or we can pretend it away and be all namaste and sunshine and unicorns. The middle path of yoga is that path of sitting with and learning from that pain, but not letting it get so sticky that it becomes part of our identity.
Mm.
And it's a tough needle to thread. And I think parents need to do that in a big way, and yoga teachers do as well. And that's sort of my focus right now, is like that, looking with compassion and loving kindness, but also seeing beyond it. Like when you're watching your kid learn to walk and they're falling a lot, and you see a future where they're on the track team. They're seeing a future where I might make it to the coffee table.
Yeah, I mean, what kept coming to mind is this image of the earth, and either it being this like hole that we can kind of climb into and allow ourselves to be buried under, that identity or whatever those roles are, versus letting it be fertile soil through which we can plant seeds and grow from, or the other side, the toxic positivity side, is like almost like putting like a house over it and just, a pretty house over it. And so it's like how we utilize those things. And I think social media, as fabulous as it is, there are dangers to that, and a lot of that is the therapy TOK, side of things, and everybody kind of labeling themselves as different things. I mean, I have had mental illness my entire life. I have generalized anxiety disorder. I've had both big T and little T trauma. But I think sometimes the danger of those formats, and especially it is coming from the wellness community, is that people are labeling themselves perhaps correctly, perhaps not. And how do you? It's such a fine line as a senior teacher for you. Like, how do you hold the space to acknowledge people, to acknowledge different people's experiences, to also encourage them that maybe you need kind of the next step of guidance as well, that other like auxiliary support? Or do you ever find it your place to be like, okay, I think you're too far in that mud, you need to dial it back a little bit? Like, where do you and I mean, I kind of feel like I would know where your answer is, just in the fact that you say you share yoga and don't teach it. I think that kind of answers us right there, and holding the space. But I'm just curious your lived experience in classes, especially with trauma being such a buzzword these days.
Yeah, well, I think like you mentioned mental illness, and we want full compassionate awareness, but that isn't doesn't necessarily mean it's an excuse not to do your work. Right? Everybody's given something. If somebody is mentally ill, they may always struggle with bipolar disorder or an anxiety disorder. And that just may be their thing. Like somebody may use a wheelchair, or some people may be on the autistic spectrum, or whatever it is their thing. And that's not necessarily going away, nor should we even try to make it go away. But the question becomes, how do we live with this, learn from this, bring compassionate awareness to it? How do we care for ourselves given the conditions that we live with? And but that is different. I mean, I think some people say, I'm an addict, therefore I'll always be a hot mess. I'll always screw up. I'll never succeed. Whereas I can say, I'm an addict, and I am, um, and I can choose what to do with that information by examining it through the lens of compassionate awareness. Or I can choose to go get drunk when things get stressful, or I can choose a different path. It doesn't change what I am or how, this sort of thing I'm carrying through life. And I think that's my thing. It's like, it's not about excuse making. Like, we don't look at someone who's experienced trauma and say, this is your excuse to never be happy again. This is the compassionate awareness that yoga teaches us how to practice, allows us to sit with that and heal from it and grow and learn from it. And it will always be there. You will always remember that traumatic experience, or have it shaped you, it molded you, and for better or worse. But now with compassionate awareness, you get to sort of steer the ship, whatever that looks like. But finding that middle path is the key, and it's not easy.
No, I mean, and it's funny, when I first did your interview, I don't think I knew. I think I had a loose idea of which chapter I wanted to talk about, and it was just I let our story kind of go there, and it ended up being the chapter on tapas, which is very much what we're talking about, right? I mean, the literal translation is fire, but it is that process, and it's, I've heard it in different ways. Some people say it's this process of transformation, but really it's the purification, right? It's getting back to the root of who you truly are through a lot of those more challenging experiences. So, and I like, so I assume, I'd love to know with your son too, especially like, and without sharing his information, but how you're then holding the space for him too, as he's unpacking those very early years, now going into this, stepping into preteen, teenage years. And what are you doing to help with the again, not transformation, but let's say the return to self, that is the process as they're evolving and becoming autonomous. What are some things you're doing as like a teen dad and also a trauma informed, practitioner and teacher? Does that all influence each other? Is it just like a shit show right now? Like, what are you doing?
Well, I feel like, for me, everything comes back to what we do on the yoga mat. It's just a metaphor for how we live life. And I feel like sometimes you need a yoga block or a strap to go deeper into the pose to get more from the pose. And sometimes you outgrow the need for that. Maybe you can't reach your toes and you use a strap for a while, and then all of a sudden one day you're touching your toes, and great, you can put the strap to the side. Other people will use the strap their whole life, and that's fine. Psychologically, it's called scaffolding. Like we can build up support structures that help people to go deeper into themselves and to heal, that they probably couldn't do without that scaffolding, that support. And so for me, it's like recognizing that he is who he is. He's had his experiences. Some of it's genetic, some of it's his soul makeup, I suppose. Some of it is his lived experiences, the painful as well as the beautiful. And my job as his father, just as my job as a yoga teacher, is to find the appropriate levels of scaffolding so that he can continue to challenge himself, but feel supported enough that he can go deeper. Not that he's so overwhelmed by it that he gets stuck. You know, like the
Mm,
block can be the thing that helps you go deeper, and
yeah.
maybe even do it without a block someday. Right? It's not a crutch. It's not a bad thing. It's support that allows you to go deeper. And for him, he happens to have a unique past, and that will challenge him throughout his life, I'm sure. But it doesn't have to hold him back. And with the right support in place from me and from many others, he will have a glorious life.
I love the metaphor of the block and the props because I think there is this idea, and especially with how Western yoga is portrayed, that you are trying to get rid of the blocks and you are trying to get rid of the props. And, one day you will be able to touch your toes, but what if the props are what are helping you go deeper? What if it is the strap that's helping you find the length in the back? What if it is the support system? So being a single dad, what are his support systems? What are your support systems as well? And how has that changed over the years?
For me, it's community, like
Mm,
having friends, and everybody's community is going to be different, but having community and and people who share my values and can inspire him in different ways. Like for many years, I lived with a beautiful woman named Wanda, um, and she was sort of like Auntie Wanda. That's what he called her. And we don't live together. She's still very much a part of his life. But there are certain things that I think her feminine energy brought to our home and his upbringing that I couldn't. It's not that I couldn't do it. I'm very nurturing. I like try to be anyway as a dad.
I'm
But
sure.
there's certain things that women bring that men struggle with, and vice versa. So I think finding that, whatever that looks like, for every family, it's going to be different. For every kid, their needs are going to be different. And for me, it was also like the San Francisco schools were not going to say anything mean, but they just weren't what Jaden needed for sure.
Let's just say we all moved, but no, but
I,
but
I
yet
live
we
in
miss it.
Berkeley, not San
Yeah.
Francisco now. But
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
so he could go to a better school
Yeah.
because I knew he wasn't going to get what he needed there. And I
He
had
could
the
if we
ability
paid
to
for it,
do that.
right? Like that's the like the private school. If we so it's like it's about the resources as well. It's finding the better school. So
Yeah.
that's
And
yeah,
here's where,
part of it.
like, talking about it opens a can of worms about privilege.
Yeah.
Like, with so many kids don't have the resources to uh, go to a private school, or even have parents that have the capacity to fill out an application for a scholarship so that they can go to that school. And but to the degree that we are capable as parents, finding ways to get them he needed a unique thing for middle school that other kids might not need. And I'm so for me that was really important to help him find that. And then I think the final thing is just recognizing that he is Jaden. He's whatever you think. It's sort of like your book. Your book was watching. I got to watch little bits of your book coming into birthing your book, and there was like when we did the original interview, you had this vision of what it was going to look like when it was all done, and I lost count how many editorial revisions and different angles you were taking, and it looks nothing in the end like what you thought it was going to look like in the beginning, but I think it came out infinitely better because you were willing to sort of go with the process and change and allow new ideas and get input from your editor or from others that read it. And the end result was something really, truly incredible. And parenting is like that. And yoga is like that. And life, hopefully, is like that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. First of all, I appreciate that, but I see that in my kids. I see it when I hear your story. I hear when parents that have children that are older and going into middle school and the teen years, that whatever their idea was of what was going to happen and who that person was, that the who that person then becomes, the child into the teenager, is infinitely more exciting and juicy than you could have ever imagined. And similarly with our own lives, right? Like when I look back at old goals of mine and then I see where I am now, it's like it's kind of mind blowing. So it's that trust as well, and really like allowing it to unfold in front of you, which I but like one thing I do want to ask about, and it kind of brings me back to that very first question, is that you know with a history of addiction, having that tendency towards the overworking and the workaholism, is there an element of control in there too with you? I mean, like I'm an Al-Anon, right? I'm not sober, but I'm an Al-Anon. I mean, that's which is for children and family and friends of alcoholics, because like I said, my addiction is totally control. So I'm just curious with you where you're at with your control these days, and if that's something that's prevalent. Would you say it's something?
I'm better than I used to be. I can
Yeah.
say that. Um, no, I mean, I think so much of yoga is finding it's when we talk about hatha and the not the literal but the symbolic meaning is sun and moon, yin and yang, male and female, passive and active. um when we come to the yoga mat, part of it is control. It's like, where do I exert control? Where do I find alignment? Where do I tell my body, go into this posture, hold this posture, sustain this posture, tweak this posture to go deeper? And part of it is the surrendering into the pose, right? Like when you're holding warrior one, part of it is the will that gets you there, and then the depth of the pose comes from the surrender as you drop deeper into it. And you need both. You need a certain amount of effort and control, but you also need to know where to let go, where to
Mm.
relax, where to surrender. um and that's where you get the depth of the pose, and it's where you get the depth of life. And so for me, I'm all I can say is I'm better at it than I once was, but I might have a little bit of work left to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's
just a little,
definitely
just a teeny bit.
definitely my karmic path, but it makes me, I love explaining it on the continuum again, right? And it sounds very much like Abhyasa Vairagya, but also Sthira Sukha. Like they're all very kind of similar principles, which is the like strength and the softness, right? The hard and the light, and trying to find that, and as containers, which is really what parenting and yoga teaching is we are these containers. Is like, when is the container too tight, and when is it too loose, and really finding that malleability throughout. So for people with histories of, who like control or who have histories, that are similar to ours, it's one of the harder parts of parenting, but also the most exciting, because it really,
Yeah.
for me, is teaching me, okay, you got to let go, Sarah. Like this is like really, having obviously not even close to a 14-year-old going to their first dance, or getting in someone's car for the first time, but watching Jonah climb a structure that is, incredibly high, and watching him do it
Yeah.
repeatedly. It's that continual starting to back up and let go, but still being there as a set of hands to catch him if,
I
yeah.
remember when my son was learning to ride a bike, and the first time I took the training wheels off,
Mm,
and I was sort of running behind him holding the seat, And there was that moment where I had to let go and trust that he was going to pedal and know that he was probably going to fall and skin his knee at some point. Maybe not that moment, but at some point you ride your bike long enough, you fall and you scrape something or get
I
a boo
felt like
boo or
last week.
worse,
Yeah.
right? And
I'm
it
41.
occurred to me in that moment of letting go, knowing that he was likely going to get hurt at some point if I let go, but knowing that that is my job
Mm.
as a parent is letting him go, letting him learn how to pedal, learn to find his own center and balance. And it's every day is some version of that. Sometimes it's really big. The first time he takes the city bus to school, and I used to track him on the phone, like watch everywhere he was going. And um, now I'm just like, whatever, just get yourself home. But it's terrifying
Yeah.
when you don't have control. But the parents that don't find some measure of surrender with their kids, they become those helicopter parents that stifle them, and they don't really serve the long-term survival.
We're
And I don't know
seeing
where
the
the
research.
balance is. Every kid is different. It's not for me to tell you when you should let go of that bike seat, when the training wheels should come off. But
Yeah.
it at some point, your your control issues are going to bump up against their need to break free from you.
Well, I think it's, when you look at the quadrants, like when we talk about the four different types of parenting, and even though we hear so many, we hear conscious parenting and mindful parenting and empathic parenting and all those, that when it's really broken down into authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful parenting, which is like those four quadrants of connection and limit setting. And so when you have very little limit setting but a lot of connection, that's like almost too much surrender, right? That is kind of the other side. And a lot of those kids, while they have really good social responsibilities, and they've got social relationships rather, that there actually still is somewhat of a high level of anxiety because they don't have that container, right? And then on the other end of that, obviously, is if you have too strong of limits and too strong of control, then people are feeling stifled. So you're always trying to find that middle ground of what that is. And I think it's always changing too, like, and that you have to be willing to balance with that. And it reminds me of tree pose, when you were talking about tree in the very beginning, and that, our foot is always adjusting, and the willingness to put your other foot down at times, the willingness to go to a wall at times, the willingness to take your arms up and, try to challenge yourself and your balance, and it's all always moving.
Do
So
you?
I've been ending these with, oh, sorry. Yeah, no, tell me.
Are you old enough to remember Weebles, the toy?
Yes, I'm 41. So yes,
Okay,
sort of.
they
Do
were
they like the poppets where you could like
the,
pop?
the tagline was "Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down."
Yes.
Um, and they you couldn't knock them over. It was sort of like an egg type of bottom, and it would rock back and forth, and you could bop it around, little sort of action figure-y thing, but you couldn't knock it over. But Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down, and I feel like that's a perfect
Mm,
metaphor for like finding balance on the yoga mat. If you're not wobbling, you're not doing yoga. But if you're falling down, you're pushing yourself too far. And we don't need to judge ourselves, but like constantly say, I need to wobble, but not fall down. And then the same is true of life. Like if you're feeling totally safe and confident and nothing's being challenging you in your life, then you're probably not growing, nor is your child growing. But you also don't want to push so hard that you're just kicking down doors and stuff,
yeah.
right? You want to wobble but not fall down.
Mm,
So I want to get I don't even know if they sell them still. They probably don't, but I would like
mm.
to get a Weeble
Well,
for my
interestingly
for
enough,
my altar.
Jonah, he just got one. He did, and there's like Ben, my husband's mom is visiting right now, and there's like she's Russian and or Ukrainian, and there's like a specific name for them, that type of toy. And I guess in Ukraine they're usually red on the bottom. And Jonah had just won one, like out of like one of those like machines that you see in the supermarket where you put the quarter in, although now they're like $1. But so we literally were just looking and playing one of these the other day. It was the same thing. It was the balance, and what the Russian word for it is, and we'll have to look it up later, is like never falls. That's the name of it. It's like yes,
Oh
and I
wow!
don't want to butcher it, but it is. It's never falls, and so it's just
Uh,
really interesting.
I feel like I want one for my little altar. Like
You
I feel like
should.
it would be far more meaningful to me than like a statue of Shiva or something that I have no personal connection to.
I mean, you gotta, that's like what it's for. It's, you gotta build it and, make it your own.
Have you
So,
seen the video? It's a Pixar short, and it's a Hindu father and his son, and the son is playing with like superhero action figures, and the father is trying to offer prayers at his little altar, his puja prayers at his altar at home.
and they're in
And
like a village in India, right? Is that this was years
I
ago?
think it's just in their home. I
Okay.
can't really remember, but the father keeps getting annoyed with the son because he won't be quiet playing with his toys while he's trying to pray. And then there's a point where the kid goes and he peeks in the altar and he sees these deities that sort of turn into superheroes and act out this big drama. And he
Mm,
sort of gets his father for the first time. And then his father sees the kid playing with these
mm.
action figures and realizes, oh my God, he gets it. It's a sweet, like, little thing about a father and a son and spirituality and how we're all sort of working through it just in our own ways, but there's not much difference between us.
I love that. And
Yeah,
that they are our teachers. We think we're here as their parents, and therefore we have the teaching, but really we're learning so much
yeah,
from our kids. We'll have to look it up, and then we'll, link it into the show notes after. But
yeah,
I'm excited to look that one up. There's a lot of really great shorts out there that are all like,
yeah.
definite, beautiful 5 minutes, and all really deeply meaningful messages. So I've been ending a lot of these with the same question, and I know we kind of cover it throughout, but the word that always comes to mind, that I would love for you to share on, is what's the most surprising way that your yoga has informed your parenting?
How I discipline my son.
Hmm.
Because I'm not saying I get this 100% of the time. Like I said, sometimes I lose it because all parents do. But I've tried with, like, when he was young, instead of having timeouts like a punishment, I would like sit him down and hold him like a reverse hug, and I'd say, as he's having a tantrum, I just need you to take 5 breaths, and then you can get back up. And that has evolved into different things as he's gotten older. But showing him how you can be in a state of disorder
Hmm.
or dysregulated, and you can use the techniques of yoga to come back to your center. And like, even at a young age, when he was really little, I just need you to take a few breaths. I need you to use your words. That's mantra yoga, connecting the lower brain with the upstairs brain by using a word or a sound, you know?
Hmm.
Um, that's what has surprised me. And it's not like I had to really think about it. It just sort of happened. Like, of course, that's what you do.
It's funny how like it's so intuitive and like aha on the other side, but then it's also, it seems so simple, but it's such a process to get there, and yet it was
Yeah.
underneath that whole time. It was always within.
And
Well,
moving it out of the realm of I'm punishing you for your bad behavior, and more I'm helping you to to navigate your way back to the best possible version of yourself.
yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier too about the tapas and the transformation, that it's not a transformation into someone different. It's this continual return to ourself, who we are underneath, and embracing all of those things, to be the
Mm.
best version that we can be. Well, I'm so grateful to you for your time. I've taken a lot of your time over the last 2 years.
You can take as much as
And
you need.
well,
I love
I'm so
chatting with you,
grateful.
and I love that you wrote this book. I wish
Thank
it,
you.
my only one gripe with your book is that you didn't write it before I was a parent, because I
Well, then
think it would have informed me a lot as I was trying to navigate. So I hope soon to be parents or current parents will pick up a copy, because I think you'll find um, a lot of wisdom in there.
well, what I was going to say is that it
None of
wouldn't
it in
be the
my
book.
chapter, but
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. And how do you feel that the Utkatasana picture is not in there? Are you relieved, or are you slightly disappointed?
unattached.
Uh, Darren sent me a text message when I was assigning everybody their poses. I emailed you and I think you called me. You like literally were like, "Why is this my pose?" It was amazing. But you took it was a beautiful chair pose, and I'm glad we did it. But yes, there are no images in the book anymore. But in our mind, we have the images. And I just so appreciate you. Do you have any fun? We're considering this will be aired kind of summer 2023 or whenever people are listening to this. Do you have any projects coming up or exciting stuff you want to share with everybody? And also, where can we find you?
I am doing, like you said, my work is sort of changing, but I really feel like I'm trying to do more stuff that is evergreen, like
Mm.
and that reaches a broader audience. Like it used to be, you had to wait for their yoga teacher to come through your town or go to a major city. So I'm trying to do a lot more stuff that's online, a lot more video course stuff, and I'm trying to take stuff that I've done in the past and translate it and use these newer technologies to just sort of reach people in a different way, in a broader way. So I have a yoga philosophy 101 course that's coming out. I have an online meditation course that's 6 weeks, a yoga in the 12 steps, yoga for HIV, all of these things, all stuff I've done in the past, but just sort of reimagining them with technology. And I'm having so much fun with it. So 2023 is a year when a lot of that is going to be released, and I'm super, super excited.
And that, again, like I don't know if you could have envisioned that 20 years ago, right? Like when you were starting
Thank
to
you,
create these
pandemic.
things. Yeah, or even 4 years ago. And
Yeah.
it's so cool. It's like, that our minds create these limits, and when we open ourselves up to what can be, it's even more extraordinary. And
Yeah,
then where can
there's
everybody find you?
DarrenMain.com. And I would just leave this one of my favorite quotes. It's from the Buddhist tradition. Out of the mud grows a lotus.
Mm.
So whatever mud you're in the middle of, however your life has fallen apart, whatever drama you're going through with your kids or your spouse or your job or the global pandemic, that's your mud. Now grow a lotus.
But also like be mud if you need to be, right? Like
Yeah.
it's okay to be mud, but know that a lotus will
The lotus doesn't
eventually.
exist without the mud, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I love that. All right, love. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you again very soon.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Yoga of Parenting. Everything we discussed will be found in our show notes. You can purchase a copy of the Yoga of Parenting book anywhere books are sold. And please remember to subscribe, rate, and share these episodes so we can get all this wisdom to as many parents as possible. Follow me on Instagram at Sarah Ezrin Yoga, and the original music that you heard both at the beginning and just a moment ago is by the amazing Egeman Sonley. You can follow Ege on IG at Egesan, Egesan, and you can find all of his amazing music on Spotify. Big thanks to Kyle Rebar for being the best producer that there ever was, and big thanks to all of you for listening.